In September 2017, a spacecraft that had spent 13 years orbiting Saturn sent home a handful of final images before deliberately flying itself into the planet and burning up completely. Those images weren't dramatic explosions or alien structures. They were quiet, almost eerie pictures of moons and rings that most people never got to see clearly. But when scientists finally processed and released them, something strange happened. Social media went silent for a moment. Newsrooms stopped what they were doing. For a few hours, the entire internet was looking at the same thing, a dying robot's last glimpse of a place none of us will ever visit in person. This is the story of Cassini's final images, why NASA chose to destroy the spacecraft on purpose, and why those last pictures still give people chills years later. Let's rewind to the beginning, because you can't understand the ending without understanding the journey. Cassini launched from Earth on October 15th, 1997. It didn't fly straight to Saturn either, because Saturn was too far away for a direct shot with the technology available at the time. Instead, engineers plotted a looping path that used the gravity of Venus, Earth, and Jupiter like slingshots, each flyby adding speed until the spacecraft finally had enough momentum to reach the outer solar system. That journey alone took almost 7 years. Cassini finally entered orbit around Saturn on June 30th, 2004. Attached to it was a small European probe called Huygens, which detached a few months later and parachuted down through the thick orange atmosphere of Saturn's largest moon, Titan. That landing remains the only successful touchdown ever made on a world in the outer solar system. And the images Huygens sent back from Titan's surface, showing what looked eerily like a riverbed carved by liquid methane, stunned scientists who had only ever imagined what that alien landscape might look like. From there, Cassini settled into what was originally supposed to be a 4-year mission. Nobody expected it to last as long as it did. Mission planners extended it once, then extended it again, and by the time it was finished, Cassini had operated for over 13 years in orbit, completing 294 full orbits of Saturn and capturing more than 450,000 images. To put that into perspective, that's more photographs than most professional photographers take in an entire lifetime, all pointed at a single planet and its family of moons. And what Cassini found out there rewrote entire chapters of astronomy textbooks. Around the icy moon, Enceladus, Cassini discovered towering geysers of water ice erupting from cracks near the moon's south pole, shooting hundreds of miles into space. When scientists flew the spacecraft directly through these plumes, its instruments detected molecular hydrogen, along with salts and organic compounds, all pointing toward a hidden liquid ocean beneath Enceladus's icy shell, an ocean that might, theoretically, be capable of supporting microbial life. That single discovery turned a frozen little moon that nobody had paid much attention to into one of the most exciting targets in the entire search for life beyond Earth. Then there's Titan, which turned out to be even stranger than anyone expected. Cassini's radar instruments pierced through Titan's thick, hazy atmosphere and revealed vast lakes and seas, not of water, but of liquid methane and ethane, along with river, channels, sand dunes, and a full weather cycle involving methane rain and clouds. It's the only other place in our entire solar system known to have stable liquid on its surface, and it looks almost eerily like a frozen, orange-tinted version of Earth, just built out of completely different chemistry. But by 2017, Cassini was running on fumes, literally. The spacecraft had almost completely burned through the rocket propellant that allowed it to adjust its course and orientation. And here's where NASA faced a genuinely difficult decision. A lifeless, uncontrollable spacecraft drifting around Saturn wasn't just going to sit there peacefully forever. Eventually, its orbit would decay, and there was a real risk that it could crash into one of Saturn's moons, possibly Enceladus or Titan, the very worlds Cassini had helped identify as potentially habitable. If that happened, Cassini could have contaminated those moons with hardy Earth microbes that had hitched a ride on the spacecraft since 1997, potentially compromising the pristine environments scientists hope to study for actual signs of alien life someday. So mission planners made a bold call. Rather than risk contaminating a possibly life-supporting moon, they decided to send Cassini on a suicide mission, deliberately steering it into Saturn's atmosphere, where it would burn up completely and become part of the planet it had spent 13 years studying. This final chapter of the mission was named the Grand Finale, and it wasn't just a straight nosedive. Beginning in April 2017, engineers guided Cassini through 22 increasingly daring orbits, each one threading the spacecraft through a narrow gap between Saturn and its innermost rings, a region roughly 1,200 miles wide that no spacecraft had ever dared fly through before. Nobody knew exactly what was in that gap. There was a real chance it could be filled with ring debris that would shred the spacecraft on contact. Every single dive was, in a very real sense, a gamble. Cassini survived all 22 of them, using the passes to gather data no spacecraft had ever collected before, sampling the composition of Saturn's atmosphere and the material between the rings directly, up close, in a way that had only ever been theorized about from a distance. And if you're finding this as fascinating as I do, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this video reach more space nerds like you. Then came September 15th, 2017, the day of the final plunge. In the hours before its death, Cassini turned its cameras towards Saturn and its moons one final time and began transmitting a farewell collection of images back to Earth. These weren't the polished, carefully processed photos people are used to seeing in space documentaries. They were raw, some of them mildly blurry, sent back in a rush before the spacecraft ran out of time. And that rawness is part of what made them hit so hard emotionally when people finally saw them. One of the last clear images shows the icy moon Enceladus, slowly sinking behind the curve of Saturn, its bright, cracked surface, glowing faintly against the planet's shadowed edge, almost like the moon was setting for the very last time in Cassini's eyes. Another final image shows Titan, hazy and golden, hanging in the blackness one last time before the spacecraft that had spent over a decade studying it would never see it again. A scientist at Johns Hopkins University described that final glimpse of Titan as an image that would stay seared into memory, carrying the mission team through long nights until humanity's next spacecraft eventually made its way back there. But the very last image Cassini's cameras ever captured wasn't dramatic at all. It was a dark, almost featureless, monochrome view looking toward Saturn's night side, faintly lit only by reflected light bouncing off the rings. It shows the exact patch of atmosphere where the spacecraft would plunge to its destruction just hours later. There's something almost poetic about that. After capturing over 450,000 images across 13 years, some of the most detailed and colorful pictures ever taken of another planet, Cassini's final photograph was a quiet, dark, uneventful frame, staring directly into the place that would end it. Hours after that last image was received on Earth, Cassini began its descent into Saturn's thick atmosphere at roughly 78,000 miles per hour. As it fell, thrusters fired continuously, trying to keep its antenna pointed toward Earth for as long as possible, transmitting real-time data about Saturn's atmospheric composition, data that had never been collected this way before because no spacecraft had ever gotten this close and survived long enough to send it back. Within about a minute or two of entering the atmosphere, the heat and pressure overwhelmed the spacecraft, and Cassini's signal simply stopped. There was no explosion captured on camera, no dramatic final transmission, just silence as engineers and mission control watched a blank screen where a signal used to be. Inside the control room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory that day, longtime Cassini team members, some of whom had worked on the mission since before launch in 1997, openly wept as the signal cut out. For many of them, this wasn't just a spacecraft ending its mission. It was 2 decades of their working lives concluding in real time, watched by millions of people online who had somehow become emotionally attached to a robotic explorer none of them had ever seen with their own eyes. It's also worth mentioning that Cassini's raw images didn't stay hidden away in some government archive after they were downlinked. NASA released them publicly, completely unprocessed, and a community of amateur image processors around the world got to work almost immediately, stacking, color correcting, and enhancing the raw black and white and filtered frames into the vivid, detailed pictures most people eventually saw shared online. That's part of why the term secret gets attached to some of these images and headlines. Many of Cassini's most striking final views weren't officially polished and promoted by NASA's press office the way earlier famous images were. They existed quietly in the raw data archive, waiting for someone outside the agency to notice them, process them, and share them with the wider world, sometimes months or even years after they were actually taken. Among the discoveries hiding in that final wave of data, scientists also spotted something they nicknamed Peggy, a tiny disturbance in Saturn's outer A ring that appeared to behave like an object forming right there within the ring material itself. Researchers suggested it might represent the birth of a brand new moonlet, offering a rare real-time glimpse of the kind of process that likely formed Saturn's larger moons billions of years ago. It's the sort of detail that barely made headlines compared to the emotional farewell images, but for planetary scientists, it was one of the most scientifically exciting observations of the entire mission. Cassini also left behind one of the strangest weather phenomena ever photographed in the solar system, a massive, perfectly hexagonal jet stream swirling around Saturn's north pole, wide enough to fit multiple Earths. Inside it, nobody has fully explained why the storm forms this precise, six-sided shape, rather than the more typical circular patterns seen on other planets. And Cassini's repeated flybys over more than a decade allowed scientists to watch its color shift dramatically with the changing Saturnian seasons, something no earlier flyby mission could ever have captured in a single quick pass. Even the Huygens landing, which happened all the way back in January 2005, still feels underappreciated compared to what came near the end of the mission. That small probe survived a fiery descent through Titan's atmosphere, deployed parachutes, and beamed back images of a landscape covered in smooth, rounded stones sitting in what looked unmistakably like a dried-up riverbed. All from a moon so cold that water ice behaves like solid rock, and methane takes the place of water in the local weather cycle. It remains, to this day, humanity's only successful landing anywhere in the outer solar system. And it happened more than a decade before Cassini's own dramatic finale brought the entire mission full circle. That's really the reason these final images hit people so hard when they circulated widely. It's rare for a photograph of a planet hundreds of millions of miles away to make anyone stop scrolling, let alone bring entire online communities to a temporary standstill. But there was something about knowing these specific images were the very last things this particular explorer would ever see. A farewell glance at the alien moons and glowing rings it had spent over a decade getting to know, that turned ordinary space photography into something that felt genuinely emotional. And Cassini's story didn't really end with that final signal. The data it gathered during those 22 grand finale dives, along with the entire 13-year archive of observations, is still being analyzed by scientists today, years later. Researchers continue to publish new findings from Cassini's dataset regularly, uncovering new details about Saturn's rings, its interior structure, and the ongoing mystery of whether Enceladus's hidden ocean could actually support life. In a very real sense, Cassini is still making discoveries, even though the spacecraft itself has been gone since 2017. There's also a bigger reason NASA was willing to sacrifice such an incredibly successful mission this way, and it says a lot about how seriously scientists take the search for life beyond Earth. The idea of planetary protection, deliberately avoiding contamination of potentially habitable worlds, meant that protecting the tiny chance of finding real alien life on Enceladus someday was considered more important than preserving Cassini itself for even a few more months or years. That's an extraordinary decision when you think about it, choosing to destroy one of the most successful spacecraft ever built, purely to protect the theoretical possibility of life on a moon we haven't even visited yet. If you want to see what real future missions might do with that opportunity, scientists have already proposed sending a dedicated spacecraft back to Enceladus, one designed specifically to fly through those water plumes again and search directly for signs of biological activity, something Cassini's instruments weren't originally built to detect with full certainty. Whether or not that mission ever gets funded and launched, it exists as a direct legacy of what Cassini found, and, in many ways, of the sacrifice made to keep that possibility alive. So the next time you see Saturn's rings in a photo, whether it's from Cassini's archive or a brand new telescope, remember that a huge part of what we know about that planet, its moons, and the possibility of life hiding in our own solar system came from 13 years of an unmanned explorer that ultimately chose, in its final moments, to protect the very worlds it had spent its life studying. Rather than simply drift on forever, if you enjoyed learning the full story behind those final images, make sure you subscribe, because there are plenty more incredible space missions and their untold endings coming to this channel soon. And if there's a mission or a mystery from our solar system you want covered next, drop it in the comments, because stories like Cassini's are exactly what this channel is here for.